The results of the European Parliament elections showing the world as voters, especially in Germany and France, are largely rejecting socialism and left-wing policies. Now, experts say this should serve as a warning to the White House for November. Bill Wirtz is a writer and commentator based in Luxembourg, and he joins us now. Bill, thanks for joining us. Why don't you start by explaining, for those who don't know, what happened last week in the European elections, because it was quite interesting.
Oh, if you're an environmentalist in Europe, you've had a bad week because it's been the biggest repudiation of the green policies that we've had here in Europe in a very long time. The European Green Deal has essentially been rejected. The Greens lost big, essentially 18 seats, especially in Germany, where they're traditionally strong. They lost over 8%. French President Emmanuel Macron lost to Marine Le Pen and lost so badly he had to dissolve parliament as a political consequence. So, I mean, we do have to say that some of the center-right and socialist parties, they managed to hold their seats, but that is also because they watered down their policy proposals, especially on agriculture, ahead of this election in response to the farmer protests. So some of them managed to actually stay in power. I think the most important thing to note here is the last election we had was in 2019. In 2019, if you took a selfie with Greta Thunberg, you could get yourself elected. Now, I think they've all deleted their selfies because environmentalism has really become toxic.
Right, because the results have been terrible. There's been a war on farming, and the farmers have been very effective, God bless them, in organizing and showing the effects of this on their farms, but also the potential consequences for the entire food supply in Europe. So that's fascinating. Mass migration is still an issue in Europe, as are these climate policies. Another thing I think that the left has always been very effective, and I want to bring this back to America because I think this part is relevant. I did a podcast this week about it because TikTok has played a role in this election. The left has been able to label the right as extremists, Nazis, and I think the fact that they were on TikTok and able to brand themselves as opposed to allow the left-wing media to brand them, helped them to sort of present themselves in the way they want to be presented. We just saw Donald Trump opened a TikTok account himself. So I'm wondering, what is the impact of social media, especially on young voters who now seem to be turning towards the right?
It's very interesting because a lot of people really did not expect that, especially very young voters. I mean, people who voted for the first time at age 18, 19 would be voting for what is often described as the far right. I really don't know which terms to use anymore because I really care more about the policies than necessarily the denomination of a political party. And it's very interesting because in Europe, we often have this conversation like social media is the devil when the wrong people get elected, and it's a saint if the right result comes about. The campaigners, when it was the Arab Spring, Facebook was this grandiose thing that helps everyone achieve democracy. But the moment Brexit happens, it's the worst thing that could have ever happened. I mean, it's really is that we flip-flop on these issues. So it's interesting how many of those parties have been able to mobilize voters through social media channels effectively. But there's also a lot of digital regulation in Europe that will try and prevent some political parties from doing the same thing next time around.
Well, many people see Donald Trump as sort of the leader in the world for all these anti-globalist leaders. So it'll be interesting to see if this is sort of what we see in the EU as a harbinger for what might happen here in the United States. Donald Trump obviously in the lead and the leader of the anti-globalist agenda here in the States. But I think all those other leaders in Europe, whether it's Santiago Abascal or Malone, a lot of them look up to Donald Trump and are looking to the United States. Last word, what does Europe think about what's happening here? Do they see any connections between what happened in the EU and how are they viewing the United States election?
I mean, we always look to the United States because it's an indicator of political trends worldwide, and it's an indicator for what's going to happen in our elections as well. So we really have a close eye on this. I think a lot of Europeans would probably, because of the policies we've had so far, look at what Joe Biden does in a more critical sense, whether it's talking about banning plastic single-use items or gas stoves or all of these things. We've had this already, and it's really backfired politically on a lot of our leaders. So I think doing the same in the United States, I mean, ultimately, the Democrats should be thankful because they're getting a blueprint of how to lose elections. Maybe they should not be repeating some of the same policies we've had here in Europe.
Very, very wise. Thanks so much, Bill. Really appreciate you joining us.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.